Welcome to the After School Project. My name is Natasha Guerrero, and I'm here with my colleague Maraf Tanal. We're both early educators in the Seattle area and both representing North Seattle College. Before we begin, we would like to offer a land acknowledgement. On behalf of North Seattle College, we acknowledge that we occupy the traditional ancestral lands of the Coast Salish peoples, specifically the Duwamish tribe, a people that are still here, continuing to honor and bring light to their ancient heritage. Without them, we would not have access to this gathering, dialogue, and learning space. We ask that we take this opportunity to thank the original caretakers of this land who are still here. We are excited to introduce our first episode with Dr. William White and Eugene Reed. Together, we'll be understanding the Black male educator experience.
Good morning. My name is Maraf Tanal. I'm part of the alumni for North Seattle College, and I'm a male Black educator. And then this podcast is about, it's called an After School Podcast, and we're going to be discussing our different topics about being a Black male in the ECE field.
Good morning. My name is William White. I'm currently part-time faculty at North Seattle College and the director of an initiative called My Brother's Teacher. Good morning.
And I'm Gene Reed, employed with Seattle Public Schools Head Start, and just glad to be here this morning with you all.
Thanks. So I have 4 questions, but the first question I have is: does being an ECE impact your masculinity as a Black male?
For me, not at all. And the whole idea of masculinity, or the lack of, or the issue of, and for me, is who got to set what masculinity is, what gender roles are in the first place. So no, not for me.
Yeah, I have to agree. It's something that I think we never really heard this word masculinity until like lately, and like it doesn't impact their masculinity because it's nothing more than another word to say doesn't impact your manhood, which is like what people have been saying for ages. So we go from these simple terms to these other terms just to like follow this Eurocentric way of thinking. And I think many times us as Black men then have to like go in dialogue, like, what is this term or what is that term? But being a Black male, like I am who I am. You know what I mean? And I'm like,
absolutely.
And if it impacts you, I think it's a lot of things that go into that, why it impacts you, because it's more on a personal level. But for me personally, I love the kids.
Absolutely. And I'm going to, simply because my presence there, I feel like they glean from having that. Studies have shown males reading to that children's ear is attuned to that, and that whole thing. So if that constitutes masculinity, well, okay, but the rest of that whole deal that someone else gets to decide what makes me a man. So,
yeah. I think for the same thing for me, I do agree with both of you guys. Both of you guys have said, nobody define who you are unless you define who you are as a person. So at the same time, for me, it doesn't really bother me a lot. I like being in there with being in a male in this field, and my presence is just like the diverse presence for the kids. So you have a male and a female. So, some female could be much louder than I am, or could be more energetic than I am. But even like for me to be there as a male, like I look at it as more of I'm proud to be there, the honor for me to be there.
Absolutely.
And what barriers do you guys face working in this field that's predominantly white? Like any barriers that you faced?
Well, I want to say, be honest, like, so just to state my positionality in the conversation of, I'm not currently in the classroom every day doing that grind that I did for over a decade, right? Like now I'm more of a researcher based and I'm in classrooms weekly, but I'm not the lead or head teacher. So I want to just state that positionality of like who I am in this conversation. I think going off of that, I think from my perspective, where I've had the most barriers for being a Black male is now being in the institution teaching white females, right?
Yeah.
And from my first year of teaching was the hardest year of teaching, but I think it was more of not an awakening, but actually being impacted by the research I've been reading about how Black male teachers get treated as faculty.
Mm.
And so when you have white females who feel that you aren't intelligent enough, right? Or you aren't AKA smart, whatever the smartness thing, right? That impacts you.
Mm-hmm.
And so me going into the even in the teaching field in the ECE realm of helping create the next generation of teachers, I'm taxed with another level of like I have to get through these white women who don't care for Black kids or why they should care for Black kids, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Or when I'm speaking at a conference on implicit bias, I'm speaking like going to their heart of like, hey, you may not understand your bias and how that impacts these Black children.
Mm-hmm.
And so as a Black male, there are barriers that I've seen in the field as a teacher, right, of how they position us. But now on the other side, as a faculty member, you have to now think about what do these white women need to know before they step in the shoes that you currently had, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And how can you make sure these babies are going to get everything they need? And
Mm-hmm.
so my biggest barrier now is like, and the one I've been fighting for years is like getting to the heart and the soul of these people who are teaching our kids, because the 80% of white women who teach is not going to flip tomorrow. Like we have to,
Okay.
I think we have to come to terms with that. And I think people don't want to come to terms with it. Like, oh, well, none of them love our kids. I'm like, how many studies say that though? Right.
Yeah.
And so my entry into many times, and Ralph, you've seen this before, of
Yeah.
like white teachers, I'm like, look, this one study is showing like this, just using a small sample, is saying what you're going to do.
Mm-hmm.
So how are you going to change the narrative if you don't think this way?
Mm-hmm.
And so the barriers right now I'm trying to break down is like the heart, is getting to the heart of these 80% of white women who, teach our Black and brown children, but then getting at the heart of people that look like us, so why you should get into the field. But at the same time, like Mr. Reed will probably agree with, everybody doesn't need to be a teacher. I'm gonna let Mr. Reed take it from there.
Oh, listen, a degree does not make you a teacher. You loving children does not make you a good teacher. There's so many other aspects to that, loving them, but also being prepared and having a genuine care for human beings. We've seen the results. The prison to pipeline, that stuff is real. This has been set up. It is so ingrained in our society that people do it without thinking. That this is your grandmother was taught this, you're taught this, the whole deal. And like Dr. White says, it's about breaking that barrier, and a barrier it's for me early on. And granted, I was in my teens when I started in the field, and not prepared for I've dealt with prejudice and bigotry and all of that at that point in my life, being in a very small town, Kentucky. So very white. Yeah, that was real. I knew that. But it's coming up against these white women as my peers and supervisors, that type of deal. I felt very scrutinized, and that wasn't just then. It's been throughout my 37 and a half year career that's I've dealt with. In the three major incidents that I've had, it's been because of white women. And you felt like I spoke out of turn, or I spoke too loud, or I spoke too harshly, or and that's that. So that was a barrier for me, and I can't really say a barrier, but just like a stumbling, or it gave me pause until I realized that you don't get to do that. When one of the last incidents, The white supervisor said to me, well, just move past it. And some of my coworkers who were
Yeah.
white women said, mm-mm, you don't just have to move past it. You don't have to just get over it. And which is what I've been told, was told prior to just if you can, just forget it. No, but one of mine to get past that is to challenge it, to challenge
Yeah.
that narrative every time. If if it comes to me, then I'm going to say to you, oh, one of my good friends who was since retired,
Yeah.
to challenge, and she said, "You're going to get in that room with the supervisor, and you're going to say nothing. That's how you're going to get in there and just let her talk, and you're going to say nothing." When I came out of that meeting, she said, "I heard you down the hall." Oh, absolutely. I'm going to stand up for myself, and you
Yeah.
don't get to push all of this on me because you weren't there. You're listening to what someone else said, and knowing that this person has a problem with black and brown people and children, and you teach. So you don't need to do that. If you're not, if you continue to stay closed-minded, especially
Mhm.
when it comes to BIPOC populations and their children, then you need to be on someplace else. I just so.
No, yo, you really just struck a chord in me because I just think back to where I was teaching. I
Yeah.
taught at several different places, the urban cities. I taught in the rural areas of Virginia, and I had the privilege, because I think teaching is a privilege. I had the
Oh
privilege of
yes.
teaching
I
students.
serve these families, these children and families. That's my role. I serve
Exactly,
them. Yes.
exactly, and I don't think people get that and the
Mhm.
power as a teacher. And these roadblocks, barriers, I always say they strengthen you to be better,
Mhm.
right? Because
Mhm.
Yeah.
I was thinking about this yesterday of like your why leads you to your purpose will lead you to obstacles, your obstacles will lead you to strengthen, but that reason like comes right back to your why, right? And like this generational cycle.
Mhm.
And it was like looking at the research for like 2 seconds of like how we're good for white children. When I state that, people say, "Who said that?" Right? I
Mhm.
say, "Go read the article." I don't. I say, "Go look for it." Right? And then once you say, "Oh, John Hopkins," right? If they quoted it, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, John Hopkins, he quoted it," right? But if I said Virginia State University quoted it, it's like, "Oh, that's a black school," right? They don't. But even though historically black colleges are like
Uh-huh.
the largest producers of teachers,
Mhm.
right? And so I state that because when I worked with like special needs kids, it was a thing of they treated the white kids with special needs just as bad as the black kids.
Mhm.
And so like my issue was like I wasn't only fighting a white woman to like accept my black kids just because they're black and that's just what you should do, accept the kid. I had to fight hard for my white kids to get accepted.
Mhm.
And I
Mhm.
think that experience for me, it wasn't surprising, right? It wasn't shocking.
Mhm.
But then that's why when I talk to white people, I'm like, y'all need to look at yourselves. Like, y'all have yourselves at like a different class. And I had parents who were white who were amazing parents that I still follow on Facebook. I mean,
Mm.
my white parents were off the chain.
Mhm.
Like it was, hey, this they're acting up. Mr. White, I'll be up there in 10 minutes. When I
Mhm.
Yeah.
call my black parents and say this child acting up, Mr. White, I'll be there in 10 minutes.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? And so going that to that barrier part, the way I like got through it was like my white parents started being stronger advocates for their
Mm.
children, which made it easier for my black children to start creeping through the door and for my black parents' voice to actually be heard.
Mhm.
And that goes to that ally piece of what does allyship look like? So when Mr. Reed talked about how teachers told him, no, you don't have to be quiet, that's
Yeah.
powerful because they'll tell you you need to just shut up, don't
Mhm.
say anything. And I want to go to the administration part of I had mostly black administrators throughout my career.
Mhm.
Throughout. I had some of the greatest and I had some of the worst.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
I remember, going back to obstacles of like teacher evaluations, right? And trying to get to that next level. And there's one principal who I respected because she had been in the field for like years and she had been in this one school always won awards, always had amazing test scores. It was just like on point. And I went in there, this new teacher, going through Virginia State University, and I'm doing what I'm trying to do. And she brought me to the office one day. She was like, Mr. White, on your teacher evaluation, I gave you like a 0 for technology. I said, I don't have any technology. And they're like, well, you knew. I'm like, no, like I know you get money for kids with special needs in your school. I learned
Yeah.
that at Virginia State University. So I don't know about that, man. You need to talk to your boss. I'm talking to you.
You're the
Yeah.
administrator.
Hey,
Yeah.
you're the minister, right? And it's like not only that, but then our teaching methods, right? One thing I really would love to study, and I want to go back and look at these teacher evaluations. I bet you 100%, I bet you millions of dollars that Black teachers who were dinged on their teacher observation forms for using methods that weren't Eurocentrically formed,
Mhm.
right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Were pushed out the field through a
Absolutely.
systemic racism, right? These other systemic practices. But I bet you if you look at those practices they use now and they call it culturally relevant pedagogy or culturally relevant practices that now white teachers explore and employ in their programs, they're getting praised for it.
Absolutely. They're innovative. Yeah.
That goes to the handshake. That's the one thing we have ever like outside of the Richard Clark, I think Richard Clark Academy out of Atlanta. The white guy down there that has that really amazing institution of like this school, and it's like almost like walking into a fairy book land. It's a Ron Clark. That's what it is, Ron Clark Academy. Outside of Ron Clark Academy, outside of the handshakes we've seen white teachers give at the door and the multiple videos that started a long time ago, right?
Yeah.
What have you seen? Right? Like, what have you seen? And I think we need to understand the narrative. Like, if we want to change the narrative, there has to be more of us.
Mhm.
Like, the three of us can't just shift the narrative in this huge flux. You can't just knock down those barriers by yourself. And it's like, we have to get to a point. This drawing back to the very first. There's 80% of them.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that stereotype, yes, it is very real. One incident that the I was leading in the classroom, and for some reason there was no one to. I had no assistant teacher, and
Yeah.
so one young African American male applied. He was already in the program, and then someone said, "Well, no, then you will have two black male teachers in the classroom. Can we do that?" And then our director was like, "Oh no, we're not going there. Absolutely, he's qualified to take the position." And so he served as my assistant for a year. But she was like, but some of the other white teachers and some they were teachers of color, but they were like, well, can we do that? And she was like, even the our what did they call them at the time? Because we were in like separate learning centers,
Hmm.
and I forget what they called the lead person. Center supervisor is what they called them. And even she was like, and a black woman. And then after the director said, no, we're not going, we're not even going, that's not even going to factor in here. And we had the best year, the best time. They were like, what about toileting children? Well, what about that? If I have a sub, if I have a who could very well be a male, what difference is that going to make? I'm not going to do anything any different than I would having a female assistant. That doesn't make sense. So again, that this whole pedagogy of idea that you have that is that has um, um, yeah, it has hurt our African American children, especially our African American boys, especially. You don't get that they get to roughhouse and be loud, and though they're being violent or being aggressive, or that you don't get it. And then the thing that you don't want to get it because you're going to get a paycheck regardless. and you're going to be praised for your innovation. I get to do a handshake with them coming through the door. Look at me.
Let me go viral.
Yeah, you go viral.
And I think that was to me really problematic because I think the first time we truly saw it on the news was the brother did it.
Mm-hmm.
And then within a month, this one white teacher did it, and it just went,
Yeah.
right. And then everybody's trying to do this thing, and it's like you don't understand. Like that's a cultural thing. Like
Mm-hmm.
that's almost like a rites of passage because before then it was seen as a gang thing.
Uh-huh.
Like, we really want to get to the center
Absolutely.
of this.
Yeah.
Black kids and black boys who did this when I was in school is like, no, you don't do that. That's you're part of a gang.
Yeah.
It's like what? Like
Mm-hmm.
right. And so I would bet it probably comes all the way from Africa, forms of handshakes that have dwelled into our community. If you think about our fraternal organizations that we have throughout, everybody has some type of handshake, some type of welcome.
Absolutely.
Right.
Some type of stance. If you're familiar with Freemasonry, so absolutely, and to be again they're right, like the head nod.
Oh my gosh, Elijah Anderson talked about the significance of the head nod. And so I learned from him. He was Dr. Elijah Anderson at Yale. I learned from him 2 years ago in a summer institute, qualitative institute. And he talked about the significance of just a head nod from a black man to another black man.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm up here like, that's real. He's an ethnographer. So all he does is really just sit and observe people like their everyday life. And he talked about being at this corner and observing these people every day and like talking to them and learning who they are and then asking like, where did he go? And then coming back sometime later. And this is a brother. I don't know how old he is, but it's an older brother, but he the significance of it. And so sometimes I get bothered and I had to, like my dad said, you can't let everything bother you. I get bothered when I see a lot of things that we do among ourselves, then get employed somewhere else and get praised. Like you said, right? It's like, it's innovative.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Marav, you talked about this a couple years ago when we had a dialogue about being in the place and trying to be yourself. And it was like, you have too much energy.
Yeah.
And I would bet we probably all get dinged for having too much energy. And I'm like, you don't have enough energy.
Listen, the child was cursing, and I'm like, no, yes, my voice is heightened. You're a bitch ass bitch, 4-year-old. Wait a minute, please come over here. Mr. Reed, that just sounded a little harsh. Whatever. So there's this whole meeting about and with the program manager and then the supervisor and then and then you're going to interview other people and then you getting a letter from one white woman who said, it scared me when he called her over and did. Okay. But you don't look at this person who did this, who said that I scared her.
Mm-hmm.
You're a white woman. We already know you don't care for the position you're in. You're our social worker, but you give very little to those BIPOC families. We know that because they've said that. They don't like you, period. And also, you're losing your job in a couple of months. So, and each one of us in that center said, she's going to take somebody with her. What? But again, I got past that. They moved the another woman, and now this white woman. This is her third place within this very system that you've been moved to. Now, when do you get to be the common denominator? When do you get that you've been in 3 different places and doing the exact same thing now that you did in the 2 prior places? But you're a white woman and you still have a job.
Yeah. And you know that's so powerful because I think about when I was in a classroom several years ago and I was just observing and I saw this little black boy and I was just like, I was like, this boy's about to turn up. You know, I just sounds like and the white teacher wasn't getting it. He was really just like looking for it. He's like, look, I don't get this work. And she's like, you'll get it. Keep on going. I don't get this work. And the little black girl she got the answer right. And she's like, oh, you did such a wonderful job. And long story short, that black boy turned up. He went to the back of the room. He was throwing paper, throwing pencils. And then she was saying he was wrong to where he got to. And she held him, and I'll never forget this happened right around the time there was a fight with the Chicago Bulls because it was like the same time frames. But she
Yeah.
grabbed him and he two-pieced her.
Yeah.
He two-pieced her. And she grabbed him and took him to the back and was like, to the room, padded room, and was like, you need to calm down and done. But fast forward, I went back and had a conversation with her and this other teacher, and I was like, okay, can we talk about the situation that happened? And she never called a child by their name. It was like it, him, they, it was like never his name. She was never at fault. It was all his fault, and just kept on talking about we're writing a bit for him. We're writing a behavior intervention plan for him. We're writing. I'm like, where's your teacher intervention plan?
Right.
And then
What could you have done?
And I stated that to my boss. I was like, honestly, having been in the field for so long, and I know y'all can tell. You can tell when a teacher is brand new. And I said, this teacher. No, I don't. I was like, this teacher's brand new. No, I'm like, I said, okay. And then I got a phone call a week later. You're right. I was like, I know.
Absolutely. Like, I'm not trying to toot my own horn, but I've been at this long enough to see. Wait a minute.
Right, because it's like you know by a certain year, you know what you do and what you don't do. And so even for to be a black male, we know there's things that I can't say to a white student in my room. Right? But there's things you can't say to a black student in your room, even if it's nothing wrong, even if it's like it's soon, hey, sit down real quick. Why are you telling me sit down? Go tell your mother. He told my son harshly to sit down. You're gonna have a black parent that might show up to your door and say you're wrong. You're gonna have a white parent come up to your door and say you're wrong. And so getting in this field, you just gotta understand that there's a lot of issues, regardless of the color of the children you teach, is deeper than that.
Yeah,
it is.
That's why it's been important for me to try to the best of my ability, get to know those families and let them get to know me. And to be able to, one parent said to me at the beginning of the year, we're virtual. She's like, Mr. Reed, this one, you got to keep your finger on. You gotta call me if there is any problem. I can do that. I can let you know, even though we've not seen them in person. That looks like it's getting ready to happen. So we'll see how it all goes. But yeah, I really appreciate what you're saying about Dr. White, about just there's that line, and you have to know of what as sad as it is, you have to know that, and yes, you're there to serve them, but you're also there to you got to use some common sense as well.
Definitely. How do you navigate reverse gender roles that women typically face when working in other fields? That's a tough one.
And that's a hard one to answer. And I think a lot of it just has to do with the way we've been conditioned. Society has turned a blind eye to the importance of education. So therefore, we're viewed as less than, and especially being African American males, that you don't have enough. You don't know enough about children. You don't have any mother wit. And so because you're a male, and that is just ridiculous. My grandmother gave me plenty of mother wit, and what that means is common sense. That's what mother wit is. You have some common sense to use, and just for me, the women are viewed as less than. So being an educator, you're kind of, for me, you're kind of clumped in with that. When we can see the evidence of you not educating your citizenry. There's going to be less poverty, less whatever white collar crime is, or even that. Even though we fall victim to all of the stereotype. There it's not happenstance again that we make up 70 or 80% of the prison population. That's not a happenstance. This is derived, and I look at that all it, that it's correlated. So again, for me, that women are less than. So being a black male teacher, then you're less than. And even some of my white counterparts that teach kindergarten and things like that have experienced some of that same thing, not to the degree I think that we as African Americans men have, but
Yeah.
some of that too. But you're a male in what's been stereotypically a female profession. So.
Hard.
And I think like being in the Seattle area, I think like gender is something that you have to be so careful with of how you state it, regardless of the research, right? And so just thinking about the research on how black males felt the need to emasculate themselves towards black children because that was the way that they were positioned by their teachers of like other female teachers, like you need to be doing this or you should be doing this, right? And so they feed into that role because they're like, I have to, right? So looking at they're viewed as role models, they're viewed as fathers, they're viewed as disciplinarians, but very, 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 if ever viewed as like this is a strong teacher, this is a strong educator, right? And so I look at that from a stance of how do I view myself against as a black man against somebody that may not identify as myself is like I'm feeding all the stereotypes regardless because I don't ever get a pass, right? And I don't look for a pass because I think when you keep looking for a pass, you never going to grow. And so I love what Dr. Reed said earlier about that whole stance of what did you say? Oh my gosh. It wasn't past, but I should have wrote it down. But it's like how you're viewed stereotypically as like a mother figure, that motherly, common sense. And I said that in a meeting literally yesterday. That's like I literally just said I took my mute off and said that sounds like common sense. Mute. And I was because it was like I don't think everybody has it.
Right.
Especially a lot of teachers I've worked with in the past. And I work with some amazing teachers, but then I work with some teachers that did stuff and I'm just like, why would you do that? Right. And then they get one like, I'm not wrong. Right. Like
you're offended. You're offended when I call it out.
You know, and it's like you can call so get your black butt over here. I'll never forget I heard a white teacher say that one time. I went off, straight off. And so I brought my black butt over there because I was like, I know you're not talking to him. Because at some point, you got to be willing to stand your ground.
Oh, absolutely.
You have to. And it was harder for me then, even as a teacher, to do that because I was like fresh in the field. I was like, what is my position?
Yeah.
But when I saw the way they position students with disabilities, with learning disabilities and behavior disorders and whatnot, which to me was a lot of false narratives because they were just children that got put with a label and they were crushing work that was on grade level. And my classroom, the black male teacher in the county, one of the 5 or 6, I was the dumping ground.
Yes.
So they would bring me every child that they thought was quote unquote problematic. No regards, you're white, you're black, Hawaiian, they say I can't teach that child. They brought it to me. Right. So I was a new cat on it and I just took it like headstrong, like, let's go. Like, this is what we're going to do. But then when they started seeing the kids make growth and through different forms of teaching using kinesthetic learning, because that's how we learn, that's Afrocentric ways, there was like, it's problematic. So when I see my colleagues over there who are just lecture style, it's perfect. And I think about this because it goes back to, I really like that barrier question and then looking at forms of like how I view myself against other people. When my students grew, these teachers complained to the principal. Now, mind you, my principals at the time were both black.
Yeah.
Right? My kids took a test that was just like the test everybody else took. That was it. From that point forward, my assistant principal, I'll never forget. I will never forget this day. She walked in my room and she said, "Mr. White, I need to know every time you're about to give an exam, I have to be in the room." So mind you, up to this point is like, he's just singing with his kids. And there's a video on YouTube literally of the way I taught this lesson, like through taught history. And she came to me in my assistant teacher who's in the room. She was there. She heard it like, whenever you do any more history tests I need to be in the room. And I'm like, for what? Well, some teachers just, looking at I'm like, so because their students can't do this, my students are wrong, right? So think about now another pressure on the students of not only, but now you have the assistant principal who is like that power, and they don't get how much power children know the principals have, right? So you as a Black person are now oppressing students who are of color and who aren't of color on a whole nother level that you're not doing to the white students.
Absolutely.
So you're being ableist. Like you're looking at this, and you yourself are oppressing a Black male teacher who's being successful at what I'm doing. So long story short, I refused to be in the room when the test. I said, you know what? I don't have to be in there. Do the thing. What did they do? They kept achieving. Right? I just kept leaving the room. What did they keep on doing? Kept achieving. And funny enough, that summer, I called. They called me like, we're gonna move your classroom. I'm like, why are you moving my classroom? I love my classroom. I'm by the back door. I can be late with my Dunkin' Donuts and McDonald's. I can sneak out to get lunch. I like the back door. I don't want to be in front of the building. And I said, well, how were the scores for the statewide assessment? Right? All my babies but one, who didn't join me until like the last 3 weeks of school, crushed their state assessments. Right? Crushed. But do you think they put that on any type of pedestal? You think they said these kids got any type of award like the other white kids and the other kids in these ableist classrooms? Nothing. And that to this day has heated me because I'm like, these kids took the test, same test, like everybody else, proper accommodations, but you're not going to award them.
Right.
And some of them outscored their peers on grade level. So sometimes I like to take race out of for a position because I'm all in the special education, and so think about a Black teacher or a Black student who also has special needs.
Absolutely.
And that goes to the research that Black male teachers are less likely to identify students to have special needs because we understand the gift within them, because we understand the gift within us that was not brought out by a teacher, but is brought out by our families and our communities. And so going into that masculinity piece of one of my participants in my research talked about the toughness you have to be in this field as a Black male and a Black male early childhood teacher that he is a whole nother way because you can be tough and nurturing.
Absolutely. And that is, yes. One of my parents said to me, she said, Mr. Reed, you're firm but fair.
Yeah, oh my gosh, I really would love to pull up my dissertation because that was literally the quote from one of my portraits where that same Black male teacher, football coach, told him that on the field of you get stern but fair. He took that with him to the classroom where students looked at it. It's like, you know what, Mr. Gray, you're firm but fair. You're stern but fair too, right? Like you're like, we get it.
Yeah.
You have to do what you got to do. You know? And this is water, by the way, Maraf. So don't come at me.
No mimosa.
No mimosa.
The next question I have is, why do we, the community, look at education less than? No.
Say that one more time.
Why do we, as a community, look at education less than?
I don't. Mr. Reed, if you don't mind, I'll start with this one.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I think that it's problematic to state that, right? Because I would want to say like who said like we look at education as less than. I don't think people of color look at education as less than. I think what we look at are the systems of education we actually have to go through.
Mhm.
That's what it really is, the bigger picture. And the piece that I've been pushing on and I've been pushed on is thinking about, as we want more Black male teachers, generational trauma is real. I'm still dealing with trauma from when I was in school, and I'm
Yeah.
36 years old, and I'm talking about pre-K drama with teachers, kindergarten, all the way through high school. Then I didn't deal with much at all in Virginia State University because it's a historic Black college university with Black people. But then when I went to a PWI, I went right into that again of trauma, dealing with more generational trauma.
Mhm.
So in my life, I only had 4 years of true healing while I
Mhm.
was at college, but then new trauma came on.
Mhm.
So I don't think we look at education less than as a community. I think that we as a community just have to come together stronger than we've been doing. And
Yeah.
we have to really fight the system because power structures are real. And
Mhm.
if you don't understand the structure you're trying to actually dismantle these barriers, if you don't get it other than what you just see, you're not
Mhm.
going to be successful, right? So if you
Yeah.
think and you go back to like the civil rights era, why they were so successful in what they did, I bring in a little theory of interest convergence, right? If you think about a lot of the reasons a lot of bills got passed that were quote unquote for Black people, they actually were good for white people in the end of the day, right? But we don't want to look at that, right? We don't
Mhm.
want to think about that. And so thinking about Brown versus Board of Education of like, oh, this is a amazing bill and we're gonna integrate schools, but over 30,000 people were fired who were Black teachers,
Mhm.
right? We were
Yeah.
doing fine by ourselves in our own building.
Listen.
We said
Listen.
separate but equal, but y'all gave us separate. We still had separate buildings, but no equal access to materials
No.
because we're doing it at historically Black colleges now. Imagine the amount of people that would still be in education. Imagine, think about, and it's deep to me because a lot of my family fell off from education because you only could go a certain grade before 1954.
Yeah.
Absolutely. The
And then
eighth
outside
grade.
of that, you had to go. Go ahead, Mr. Reed.
Wow.
The eighth grade. A lot of my uncles and eighth grade, and especially those that were older,
Mhm.
like my father's um, my aunt's husband, my father's sister's husband. You went to the eighth grade, and that was it.
Wow.
You were back farming or cutting tobacco or doing what have you after that, and that was it.
Wow.
Hmm.
And that's why we
That
bring
sucks.
that term grit that we talked about in Bettina Love's book, and the problematic way that we look at it is our parents and our ancestors didn't know any more than of like, hey, you got to be a hard worker. You got to
Yeah.
go to school. So when I think about why we look at education less, I don't think we do because our ancestors would want to push us and push them like, you got to go to college.
You
You
gotta
got to
go.
go to
You gotta
college.
go to
Go
school.
to college. That's been the message throughout. I think that to really get to I'm gonna use this word because I've been using it a lot like canopsis. I don't even know if that's the right word. It just sounds good. I like it. You know, and
You,
I,
you
I
do.
got a PhD now. I said you can say words and it's like it
Yeah.
makes sense, right? No. But to really get to the heart of it, if we
Yeah.
want to move forward as a people of color, if we really want to move forward as Black people, we really want to move forward as brown people, we have to start educating our children. And what do I mean by educating our children? I mean, okay, we can't just dismantle that school tomorrow, but you can show up in that school,
No. Yeah.
you know? And so
Yeah.
looking at like, well, I work a certain, okay, you work that time, I work this time. Well, guess what? I need like 5 hours of sleep. When I get up, I'm gonna go to school, to school with the kids for like 3 hours.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I get home this time, I'm gonna show up. And I think if our community kept on showing up in a space, people would be less likely to treat our little black and brown babies the way they do.
And that's like the healthcare system. When you
Yeah.
have, if you've had ever had a family member in a nursing care facility, let let them be in that facility and no family show up ever. You cannot tell me that that person is not treated differently than
Yeah.
someone whose family is showing up. I know that. I've seen it for myself. It's the
Yeah.
same. It's the same. My sister was told by the principal when my nephew went to middle school, and she's director of the library, so she's just yards from the middle school campus.
Yeah.
And she told the principal, and my nephew struggled, and we praise God now. He finished his bachelor's. He's in occupational health and safety. He's got a job. He's doing his reading level was like now to be able to see these forms and do all these things, and you're reading it. He and my niece are 17 months apart. She's older. Kirby, she finished her master's. She's working as a speech pathologist and everything. When they were playing video games, she would read the instruction and he would do it. She'd read it. He could get to all these levels, but she had to read those for him. And so just to see, and then the closeness that they have, I've said all that to say that the principal told her, Manon said, well, I'll be up there. And the principal said, okay, Miss Pittman, just let us know, what time you're coming, when you, no, my sister said, make no mistake about it. When I can come, it matters not which time that I'll come through the office, but I won't do that because this is publicly funded. This is what my child is here, so you can look for me. Just so you know that.
I like that because it's like my nephew. My mom has literally been at the school my dad and mom would go to school every Wednesday, but pre-COVID. They were there from when he started preschool to now he's going into the middle school next year. They've been in that building every week.
Yeah.
And they were in the classroom every Wednesday, right? Up till this past year when he went into gifted education, they didn't want my mom in the classroom. And so she was told she couldn't enter into this classroom and she couldn't be there, but they were still up. My mom's still up in that building.
Absolutely.
They still because they knew a little bit, but they didn't know the whole story. Teachers didn't know that his uncle was getting a PhD and this is 4th degree in education. They didn't know that his mother was a speech pathologist and his father is a graphic designer. They didn't know that his other aunt runs a real estate school in the state of North Carolina. They didn't know that, his grandfather just finished another degree, right? So when they look at us, they don't know. And as people know that, like, when look at me, I usually wear hoodies, shorts, because I'm like, this is who I am. This is how I'm comfortable. This is how I'm going to show up, right? But I know that I called my mom one day when they said so. I said, do I need to show up with my suitcase? I said, I'll show up with my suitcase, my briefcase, and I could be at the front door because I've been in special education long enough that I know the ins and outs and what you're saying that is problematic. And so sometimes you got to show up. And I think that if more Black parents felt empowered, they will do more in the school system. But a lot don't feel empowered. They don't feel like, oh, I just got to send my kid to school like I was sent to school, and then I got to send the next kid. And so we got this generational thing going on that it doesn't stop. So somebody like us come in and say, hey, you are empowered. This is what you can do. This is what's going on. Let's have a conversation.
You have the final say.
Next school year, this is what's going to happen.
Absolutely. You have the final say. You have the final. You're your child's first educator. Everything you are. So you have the final say to all of that. And we had a meeting not too long ago, and that's what I said too. I think what the white establishment has to understand that 80% of the children that you deal with their parents are products of the system that you now run. Understand that. So all of these things, and Dr. White, you talked about that historical
the
trauma. Absolutely, that's real. That we're still dealing with high blood pressure and all these. It's not happenstance. This has been part of our DNA simply because of what our forefathers had to endure. That this is real. It is not something. It's not something abstract. It is real. The data shows. And again, and then when like you said, had an opportunity to heal, that is that it's so imperative, but a lot of us don't get an opportunity to do that. So it just continues, and it just gets compounded. When the teacher, she's screaming at the class, and I'm in the 7th grade, and she's talking about, you will respect me, and the desk was up on like a little dais, and so and then the chalkboard, and so you're sitting up higher than your students, this white woman, and she's going on about, you will respect me, and I mean, she's literally screaming at us. She's literally screaming at us. So when she finished, I just simply said, respect. She came back there, literally pulled me up out of from the desk, and took me out in the hall, called the other white teacher from across the hall, and gave me 3 licks with her paddle. It's what she did. So I went home, told my grandmother. My grandmother said, when you get to school tomorrow, you tell her to call me. So I got there early. I stepped on the dais, put my hands down on her desk, and leaned over and said, my grandmother said for you to call her. Whether she did or not, but the next year she took sabbatical. Even though I didn't know that my cousin, like 5, 6, 8 years prior to, had the exact same exchange with this woman, and she took sabbatical after that too. There was no reason that this person should ever be in anybody's classroom, ever.
But they're in these classrooms.
They're in them. They're in them. I think that may have been 8th grade, 7th grade. We're going through our history, and Shirley was her last name.
Okay.
And she said, well, what we're talking about, slavery, of course, that's the height of, we start, this is where we got our beginning at slavery. No. Anyway. So she said, well, what was one of the, and I'm very quiet, I say very little. She said, well, what was one of the reasons for the Civil War? So I said, slavery. She said, no. She said, that was kind of a reason. She said, it was more about economics. It wasn't about, what the hell ever, woman. And then you're teaching somebody's children. And after, and that was sort of my, to get into this too, because we got people like you that need to be called to task. Absolutely. And I hope to see her one day, to tell her to her face, what you did was you lied. That's what you did.
You should.
And I'm sure you've been there for years. So you've been lying for years.
Nice. I have one more question. We ran out of time.
All right.
The last, I love this conversation. I wish we could keep it going. It's just like, I'm learning a lot, and I'm pretty sure like our listeners will learn a lot from you guys, because you guys been in this field for a very long time. And we're wrapping it up. What's one advice would you give a Black males who's trying to get into this field?
Mine would be to be your authentic self. Dr. White talked about wearing his hoodies and his shorts. Be you. And the world will adjust. That's what I offer, and take advantage of all support systems that are available to you. And if they are not there, then create them. Create those support systems to aid you. How at the onset, how wonderful it have been, and to had I known to be able to go to a especially to a predominantly Black institution. And like Dr. White said, when we talked about separate but equal, that and then when integration, that hurt us.
Yeah.
That hurt us, because I don't believe that they were asking. I don't believe that the leaders were asking for you. What they were asking is that we be equal. If you had given us all of the things that we needed in our own educational system, the books and the supplies, all of these things, what they asked for was equality.
Yeah,
that's what I believe. And I know that goes off, but to me, it all tracks back.
Yeah.
I think
your authentic self.
The one thing I would say, I definitely agree with, like, find your circle. But I think one big part for me was listen.
Mhm.
I think as a black male teacher, young, bright, bushy tailed, I was ready to just fight the system. Just
Yeah.
like, no, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong. And when I learned to just shut up, that my dad taught me, he would never tell me shut up. He say shut your mouth, but I say like shut up. I learned to shut up, and I learned just to open my ears.
Mhm.
You start seeing who's for you,
Mhm.
who's against you.
Mhm.
So my advice to a black male teacher who's getting into this field, who's in the school, listen, because by you listening, you're gonna learn. And
Mhm.
by you learning, you're gonna find your allies. And your allies are gonna be white women, white men, and the couple black other people that are in the building. And one more piece of advice, and I don't think many people know this, get to know your janitor.
The janitor and the people in the kitchen. Absolutely.
They're gonna be your mommy and your aunt.
Yes. Absolutely.
If you treat them like gold, which you should, and don't put yourself on this pedestal, the other teachers do when they a lot of teachers look down on them. And I'm like,
Absolutely.
and my mom she was a teacher, so we always respected. We used to help them clean classrooms
Yeah.
Mhm.
from early, right? So get to know those folk because they know everything's going on in the building. I'm like one comical thing, they know who with who not supposed to be with who, and who's visiting who after school hours.
Absolutely. They know it all.
They're like
Yeah.
the bartender of the school.
Yes. They know it all. And you're going to be without nothing. That's been my experience. Get to know those people, treat them with respect. I can walk into that kitchen. I need this.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, here. You've got to keep track of this. I don't have to keep track of it. Here, you take that.
Got
The
it.
same way with the custodian. Give me some paper towel. Give me some. Well, we filled it yesterday. I need something to put down here so when this runs out. Yes, that's key to me.
Yeah.
Get to
Love
know
on
them.
them. They'll show up for you more than more other people in your building, and make sure to empower them. I had those
Absolutely.
super the custodians in the building and
Mhm.
maintenance workers. They were reading with my children,
Mm-hmm.
right? And you know why? Because they were black,
Yes.
Yeah.
and so I had to find the black people to come in this room and say, "Hey, come read my." And kids loved it.
Absolutely.
So loving yourself. So yeah.
Yeah.
So thank y'all for this opportunity.
No.
This has been
Uh,
real
Absolutely.
Dr.
this
William,
morning.
I have one more question. Can you talk a little bit more about MBT?
Yeah, so my brother's teacher is an initiative to get more black and brown males from their junior high school all the way through college. And basically it's really a free ride through school and leaving with no debt. One of the things and initiatives we also already doing at North Seattle College is that we're building out our cohort, right? So we have a lot of black and brown male who are alumni, such as Maroth and Sopath and others who are like taking part and are flourishing, right? So at the
Yeah.
North Seattle College campus, what we're really looking at, how can we empower those already in the field to be in the grow even more? So a lot of
Okay.
our aspirants are currently now alumni, and some are just graduating, are going into getting their master's degree, right?
Mm.
Everybody that's come out of MBT so far has been on a full ride
Yeah.
for their master's degree. And that's what we're doing. Why? Because we know how important it is to have black and brown males in the classroom in front of our children, but we even know it's more important than who we need in front of the people that are going to teach our children most likely.
Absolutely.
I agree.
Absolutely. Yes.
Thanks, God. Thank you guys for being here, Natasha. I forgot to introduce you earlier, so you want to introduce yourself now?
Hi, everyone. I'm doing the recording, but I'm Natasha Guerrero. I work at North Seattle College, and I'm also an early educator in the Seattle area. So, really, truthfully, thank you, Marav, Mr. Reed, Dr. White. Like, I really appreciate everything that I have learned. I sat back here, I held this space for you all, and I've learned a lot. And I wish I had turned on my camera because you would have just seen me like, yes, that's exactly what I'm talking about. Like, and also be shocked about the experience you've all faced. So thank you so much for sharing. I really appreciate it.
Mhm.
Thanks for everybody being here early Saturday morning.